Hello, Dojo
Hello.
family. Oh my goodness. I am here today with my sister, ally, profound musician, medicine woman, visionary, guide, seer of truth, Dorian. We actually met in a ball pit dressed up. And we have been journeying in so many ways for the past several lifetimes, but in this one, for the past several years. And Dorian is one of the women of the Dojo Council, and we have built a relationship of deep trust and profound witnessing over the years. Witnessing major life initiations, witnessing one another and the rest of the women in the council really face off with major edges, expand beyond them, deepen in trust, expand in love, take quantum leaps in service, and really own truth, even when the voice is shaking. And I witness that quality in you deeply, Dor. And it's such an honor to bring your voice to the dojo family because you truly are a core piece of the foundation of what the dojo field represents and the origins of the places that we began and all came from as part of the OG cohort. So thank you for bringing your voice here. And I love to pass the mic to you and just hear you introduce yourself and also share at the leading edge of your life right now, what feels most alive for you?
Well, first of all, I love you. Thank you. Thank you. Um, yeah, I mean, I think you introduced who I am pretty well. And yeah, first of all, I just want to say, I think what really allows this field to be so transparent, in the dojo ecosystem is, you are the core creator and you have such a compassionate heart, and it's easy to bring people into their truth when you can be resonating from that place. So first, I just want to say that thank you for being a being who can see everybody's light. You're somebody who can look at somebody and you see the light in them, and that's what makes, I think, a leader in these spaces the most potent, is when you can see somebody's light when they can't see it, and you're able to see that in me as well in times where I'm maybe, in my own delusion, in my own illusions, right? And I'll just share transparently, like before this call, I was like voice noting Zahara. I was like, oh, I don't know, like I'm gonna come on. What am I gonna talk about? And I brought up this, the classic voice wound that I've been working on pretty consciously for a while now. And we can work on something quite a lot, but we're always gonna, be spiraling, like, and getting better. And I think what came up for me was like this whole thing about needing to have some sort of identity structure that's the solid thing, like, oh, I am this leader who talks about this.
Mhm.
And I think there's this pressure
Yeah.
in today's world that we need to have this set in stone, defined purpose of like, this is my offering. And there's an idea that if we have our thing, that then we're in purpose.
Mhm.
And then we're essentially in this world, we're worthy.
Mhm. Damn. So for everyone listening and Dory, you're already aware of this, but the intention built into the core of this podcast and every container in the dojo ecosystem is really to allow for the emergent field of what is the unique alchemy between Dorian and I to reveal, what is actually ripe that will serve as a catalyst for expansion in the moment, and trusting that what's alive for UD is landing at the perfect time in the perfect moment right upon the ears and the hearts that are meant to hear it. And for all of you listening, like, I don't want to skate past that quickly, because this is such a profound collective experience in wounding of, like, if I don't have the set fixed identity structure that says I am this thing, that says I'm a certified that, or I have this degree, or I've already defined the form of what it is that I am in the world, that somehow then gives me the accoutrement, the worth, the like gold star that validates why you should listen to me. So if the individual is imagining, oh, I don't have that thing, so what do I have to say, what I have to say valuable? Just, if you're listening, if you've had that question or inquiry within yourself, I would encourage you to just slow down for a moment and call forward that aspect of yourself that has had a belief structure that if I don't have this validating external influence, then what I have to say doesn't matter. Or what does it matter what I have to say? That will then lead to not speaking, not singing, not using your voice. For me, a version of that is, well, I didn't sing for my entire life until the last couple of years, because I'm not a professional musician, and that's not a thing that I do. And I didn't have the identity structure that had been validated throughout the course of my life that said, oh, I'll be received well if I sing. So I just didn't. I just fucking didn't. And it's wild the way our beliefs actually create our reality. And so it's powerful as fuck that here you are, right at the leading edge of your experience, really owning the wisdom and potency and vulnerability and compassion that you have too, to be able to say, hey, I'm willing to do the thing and speak, even though I haven't been able to identify the particular identity structure that justifies why I should be speaking, and doing it anyway because of who you are. And I know for me, that is such a deeply valuable invitation that I trust will serve and ripple out to the ears that are listening. And it's so funny, you guys, because I feel like we are so commonly so much harder on ourselves than we project into the external other people will be. Because when Dora shared this with me, I was like, wow, it's like, maybe there's not this one thing that you've decided you are that justifies why your voice is valuable on this podcast. And from my eyes, I'm like, you're a polymathic musician, vocalist, medicine woman, facilitator, songwriter, podcast leader, photographer, video, woman I trust the most to see through your lens, through your video work, through your image capturing. Like, you're an artist and a creative through and through. And I'm curious how that experience has been for you, because I do see that I do work with a lot of artists and creatives. And sometimes there's this like polymath, which is one who's genius in many different areas, polymath paralysis, where it's like, if I'm not one thing, then maybe there's no one thing that I could claim for myself. So it's all of these different areas that I could do and that I do well, but it can like spread out the attention. And then it's like, almost like, does it create a dilution of focus, or is it actually exactly like, how do you navigate that template when there's many things that you're good at and interested in? And I'm curious how that occurs for you.
Well, I would say, honestly, I'm contemplating that quite a lot.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where the analysis paralysis comes from, because we're in this world that's very much like, you have to have your one thing. Mm-hmm. And we're taught that. But it's interesting. There's this quote, Jack of all trades is a master of none. And we know that, but we don't know the full quote. They literally cut off the full quote. And it says that Jack of all trades is a master of none, but better than a master of one.
Oh, wow.
So why did whoever spread this quote just cut it off?
Uh-huh.
And it's just interesting. And I think I've been really in the space of really embracing like not putting myself in a box.
Yeah.
I don't fit in a box. We aren't meant to fit in boxes. I don't want to live in a box. I want to light a box on fire and use it as heat inside of my queendom. You know what I'm saying?
Fuck yeah.
That is like everything that I want it to be.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So
100%.
it's yeah, I recently have been exploring structure in a way that I can actually attend to all of the things that I want to do in the world. And I think what really matters is that you have the fire inside of you for everything you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you have that burning, I think that's what allows us to pull in the forces to create all the things and to let us do all the things. And as I've contemplated, I think for me, I need multiple things for my fire to be lit. That's how I operate.
Yeah.
And I think some people are that. There
Yeah.
are some people who are built for that. And our brains may be structured in a different way.
Yeah.
So we need to create more better systems for ourselves and not make it like we're wrong or we don't have the ability to be successful.
Totally. True. Said like a true Gemini.
There we go.
I in the early stages of my facilitation, I really had a lot of focus around evolutionary astrology. And my teacher would always say, boredom is the antithesis for Gemini. Like you need to keep life interesting. And there are, I do agree that there's going to be archetypes that have a certain laid down pathway where focusing in one zone over an extended period of time and letting that be the area of mastery is the path. And then there's individuals that are more polymathic. And when you're naturally gifted in many different areas, of course, it makes sense that you're going to want to express those gifts and be exploratory and curious and actually spread your wings as far as they can go and not allow any area to atrophy, by through underuse. So I do find I've had an experience recently that I watch retrospectively different parts of my path along the journey that seemed like they weren't connected. Like they seemed like they were, had nothing to do with each other. And then I look back and all of a sudden it's like everything glued together and made perfect sense why this thing happened that way. And then this territory was where I was building muscle in a different zone. And then how that contributed to my ability to do this and how they all are connected. And so I think sometimes it's like the paradigm or the context or lens that we're looking through. And rather, if you're called toward many different areas of service, let's say, or creativity, it's like going to the gym and doing leg weights one day and arm weights and different exercises in different ways, but it's contributing to the whole body. It's contributing to the whole body, And so it's interesting because we also have to go through the learning so much deeper around what it is that we're here to teach. And so it's interesting because I know you deeply as a vocalist, as a musician. Your voice is so unique. I think Dorian, I'm going to set a teaser that you're going to be releasing some music soon. And so definitely check out her music when she releases it on Spotify. Your voice, literally the sound of it, the resonance of it is so unique. And so it's very interesting that what came up for you today was this feeling of like I'm having nerves come up around sharing my voice. Like, do I have anything that will impact to share? And so I'm curious how that is being like, what actually goes on in your physiology when that happens, and how do you go about navigating and being with yourself when stories like that come up around your voice? Or I know you started your own podcast recently, when there's opportunities for you to step forward in your leadership and your voice right at the leading edge of that. How are you hacking that, whether it's connected to speaking or singing, whatever category feels true and alive for you? Because I know that you being here right now is you doing that work.
Mhm.
And as you demonstrate that in live time for all of us, that's where the teaching comes from. So, like, I'm wondering if you can share your learning in real time connected to the unlocking of your voice, even when it shakes, even when it feels nervy, as a teaching.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually recorded a podcast, basically breaking down, like, I broke down like all of the things that I've learned and like really sharing your voice authentically, like what it takes and
Yeah.
the tips that came out of it. And gosh, there's so much to share here, but the first one I said is like, you don't wait till you're not afraid anymore. You have to fear going in with fear, possibly looking like a fool is like the key to entry.
Yes.
So you have to be willing
Uh-huh.
to like, you have to walk in the fear. There's no waiting until it's gone. And this is something that I found interesting was something that I've learned over the past year of like observing other thought leaders and influencers. And like, I remember, yeah, just being with an impactful thought leader who in my eyes was like an incredible speaker. They're doing TED Talks, and something they said was like, my voice still shakes. Like, I'm not afraid. And I'm like, what?
Uh-huh.
You mean you're afraid too? And that for me was like, oh, like this is just how it has to be. And everybody, like that fear exists in everybody. And then the other piece that's come out for me, and I'm still working on embodying all these things.
You're doing
But
it.
the other thing that's been coming up for me that's huge is you have to willing to be a mirror for other people's projections.
Mm.
So you have to be willing to be misperceived in a way that you don't want people to perceive you. And you have to be okay with that. And you have to, and then the last piece of that is you have to know yourself
Mm.
in order to do that. In order
Yes.
to willingly stand as a mirror, because that's what you're doing when you're putting yourself in the eye of the public or just standing as a leader and speaking anything that is in some sort of an opinion or a viewpoint that maybe you're not, like, as a true thought leader, you're not. A true thought leader is somebody who is willing to say what other people aren't. That's what it requires. You're not just being a copy of a copy.
That's the definition.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
it's scary. And so you
Uh-huh.
have to be willing to understand people are going to misperceive you, and you have to be okay with that. And
That's
so what I've realized is like, well, in order to be okay with that, I have to know myself so deeply that I know where I'm coming from, and I know the innocence in my heart. And I also have to be connected to my why
yeah.
enough to stand there and share. And that if somebody misperceives me or sees me in a certain way, I have to know myself enough to, one, question if there's anything there for me to actually look at, two,
Mhm.
right? Like, because if there's a trigger, then it's like, oh, is there actually a quality that they're pointing out that maybe I can develop more, that they're seeing, and maybe they're actually right? And can I own that? Because we're all learning.
Mhm.
Or, can I know myself and know that this person, I'm probably being a mirror for their own insecurity?
Mhm.
So there's a lot.
Wow.
But
I mean, let's just pulse on that whole
yeah.
transition there for a second, because this is very significant, and I actually hadn't thought of it that way before. That in order to speak your truth and lead, to be a leader, is to risk the possibility that you will be misperceived or negatively projected upon, And that is to expand your capacity enough. If you're willing to do that, you are in the process of expanding your capacity enough to emotionally have the emotional resilience to tolerate one of the core human woundings, which is, why do we not like to be misperceived, judged, or negatively projected on? We don't want to be rejected, abandoned, pushed out of the pack. It's like primal. We want to be liked. We want to be loved. We want to be included. We want to be uplifted. And so to experience that can literally feel like death. So you're expanding your emotional resilience to tolerate the edge of, man, I really don't want to feel that, but it's become more uncomfortable for me to withhold my truth, for me to withhold my voice, for me to play small, for me to hide in order to stay safe so I don't experience the feeling of rejection. It's become more uncomfortable for me to reject myself by hiding my voice than it is for me to own my voice and risk possibly being rejected or misperceived or receive that negative projection. But I know that I will stay with myself. I know that I won't reject myself. I know the innocence of my heart. And that's where you brought us to, oh, you have to know yourself. So in order to do that, that feels really important to look at, is like, do you know yourself? And when you know yourself, what I speak to there is knowing yourself as innocent, like knowing yourself as the come from is forgivable. You know, you'll have compassion and care for yourself without holding yourself to a standard of perfection. So when you know yourself and you know your truth, which means no matter what you say, whether it's perfect, fire, landed solidly, or you totally fuck it up and forget the words, or you say something you didn't really mean, even if you say something you didn't mean, do you know yourself well enough? Meaning like the innocence of your little Bubba baby, little nugget, that you could tell that part of you, all right, maybe we said something we didn't mean, we got nervous. Okay, I totally forgive you. It's all good. We're going to get up and do it again. I love you. I forgive you, even if anyone listening didn't get it. And ironically, that takes the pressure off and actually lubricates the pathway where it feels a little bit more effortless to speak. So it's like, I'm imagining, you are on the path to embodying it. In fact, you're embodying it right now. By walking when, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is walking when fear exists and doing it anyway. That's bravery. That is courage. If I'm watching somebody speak or sing or express themselves publicly in any way, the most captivating thing is an individual that's right at the leading edge of their vulnerability. And it has done exactly what you just named. So there's a freedom of judgment that I think is important to claim in any moment when we are expressing ourselves, because there's something compelling about someone speaking or singing or dancing or whatever, even if they're not seasoned, certified, professional X, Y, or Z. Like my friend today, we were singing, practicing music and guitar, and neither one of us considered ourselves professional musicians in our entire life. We're both in our mid-30s. And we both just started singing and playing the guitar in the last couple years. And we're like so proud of ourselves that we're singing and playing the guitar. And I'm now offering, music and ceremonial spaces. And like, there's like a big growth spurt that's happening. And we're so proud of each other and ourselves. And, she said something that I thought was really profound. And she said, I actually love your voice. Like, I love that there's something special and unique about a voice that hasn't necessarily been professionally trained. That like when I'm in a ceremony space, let's say, and there's individuals that are singing that are right in that spot you're speaking of, where it's like vulnerable and they're singing, but they're doing it and they've done the practice to get there. And it's this vulnerable expression. I actually feel like so magnetized to that. I'm like, wow, like it has all my attention. And what I notice is that I get the most compelled and the most drawn when that individual has done the work to free themselves of judgment and excuses, which those both create comparison, excuses, and judgment create contraction in the body and the nervous system that leads itself to anxiety, and then the expression itself is contracted. But when someone's singing or speaking or expressing, and while they're in the action of it, they're not also simultaneously judging themselves or comparing themselves or justifying or excusing themselves, that actually creates a repellent energetic, which is ironic because it self-fulfills the thing.
Yeah.
So it's like when an individual has done the liberation work of being willing to be vulnerable and seen in their vulnerability, because that expression is where freedom lies, and they're in the expression, it actually doesn't matter if it's perfect or how it sounds or if the words are exactly right. Mm-hmm. But if while I'm speaking, for example, right now, or the next time you speak, if the whole time you're like, I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't, I'm not really ready for this. And like the way you just named it when you started, you're like, yeah, there's a part of me that had these excuses that I just called and named, or self-judgments. And then you sat and worked with those within yourself and then stepped into the true, empowered, authentic, most vulnerable. Fuck yeah. I'm hearing you just landed a fucking transmission that was an expander for me. And in that expression, as you're speaking, or if I pick up a guitar and start singing right now, because you're free in the speak, you're not judging yourself or in comparison actively or justifying it. Or I used to, every time before I played a song, I used to say, just so you know, this is new, like almost like apologizing in advance for how, to lower your expectations, don't expect too much, which is this a protection mechanism. Mm-hmm. So then when I'm really singing, I'm kind of already in the, like trying to protect myself from judgment, but it's that actually adversely impacts the expression. So my work has been letting go of apologizing for justifying why I haven't, had the history or professional training of an artist yet. So I've let go of that. And the way I've let go of that is actually through committing to training, to committing to practicing and opening up my voice more and more. I'm like, I don't need to apologize. Like I'm becoming an artist. Like I don't need to justify or make an excuse. I let go. I did work around comparison and the way I would judge myself in comparison to how anyone else sings. Like the other musicians' voices are more naturally, they can hit different octaves and they can do all these things. And I don't do those things, which then circles right back around to why I should make an excuse and apologize and let whoever's listening know that, I'm not that. So lower your, like that whole matrix, it would create such a contraction in my body that the actual expression would be good, but because I was in judgment, in comparison, thinking about what other people might think about me in comparison to others, is only reflecting what I think about me in comparison to others. So I swear, as I've let go of comparison, I have fallen. It's official. I can officially claim it. I have fallen in love with my singing voice. It keeps getting more rich. It keeps getting more open, and it's in direct proportion to where I've done the work inside to let go of comparison, which is knowing who I am, knowing my innocent heart, and knowing that even if it's not perfect, I have nothing to apologize for, that I'll be with myself and love myself and tell myself, you just keep going. You do it again. I'm so proud of you, And so it's willing to walk in the fear, like you said, being willing to sing in the fear, knowing who it is that we are, no matter what it is that you're afraid of, being willing to do the thing, not rejecting yourself so that we don't risk being rejected by others. And then letting go of comparison, judgment, and excuses, right? That are just protection mechanisms that create blockage in the channel.
Yeah.
But when we're fucking relaxed and we already know that we're not going anywhere, that we're not going to abandon ourselves, that we're so proud of ourselves, which is what I'm watching you do, using your voice now, starting your podcast, releasing your first songs coming on Spotify. Like, it's amazing. And I am saying this to name it for anyone listening. Tune in your own life to where you hold yourself back or where you self-fulfill the experience of perceiving judgment from outside of yourself, because the way that you're speaking, walking, singing, serving, whatever, is laced with your own judgment of yourself that's coming from a high performer thing, a comparison thing, all those layers. So curious if you have any thoughts around what I'm saying, but I relate in my own ways to this piece, and it's collective. We all have a version of it, I believe.
It's a super powerful story about your voice, and I love hearing that you're falling in love with it, and like,
I am.
and I think it requires us. I mean, I think, the fear of speaking, like, it's so past the, like, I remember I told somebody, how I was dealing with this, and they're like, well, just stop thinking about whatever other people thinking of you. And I'm like, bro, like, it's not just that, it's like a nervous system response. Like, so there is, in the beginning, I think so much, it's just about showing up and doing it and starting to show the nervous system that this is safe, because you can tell yourself everything, but your nervous system is still going to be triggered if it's like, because there is that deep fear that's been embedded in so many of our DNA, like, especially as women. Like, wow, looking at my familial line and my grandmother and like how far I've come, I can see that fear is deeply embedded in my lineage. And so there's like that first initial phase of just that nervous system activation that's going to be there, that you have to move with. And like, I've been sharing my voice more and more over the past couple of years. And I just launched my podcast a couple of months ago, and I was like feeling ready for it, and I was like, yeah, like, I'm not afraid. I'm good, like, I'm excited to launch this. And what happened though was, like, the night before, I didn't even realize how much fear was housed in my body and my nervous system until I got closer and closer, until it launched. And I literally couldn't sleep. I was like having a mild panic attack at night. And it was crazy because it wasn't even mental. It wasn't even like I was mentally being like, oh, what is this? What are they going to think of me? It was so somatic that I had to be with it. And that's just important to name as well, that like, it's like a body process too. And I didn't even know how much was housed until I got closer to the line, to the finish line. And it's just interesting. And I think too, one of the biggest lessons I've been learning in life, one of my biggest downloads that's been really landing, because I've intellectually understood this, like, life is a game, like, life is always giving us the opportunities to expand, like, the dojo is our life. But it's been actually, that's been integrating deeper recently. And so what I've seen in regards to like sharing my voice in the podcast is I named it the freedom code. So it's about freedom, like personal freedom. And so, of course, when I'm claiming to step into evolve in freedom work, life is going to unfold what is going to show me where I'm not free. And let me tell you, there's been a lot that's come up to show me where I'm not free. And I have a lot of work to do. And wow, like, it wasn't there until I started to claim it and step into it. And I think a lot of people will get close and then things will happen, and then they'll stop, like, right when they're almost there. And I've had to even like, I've had to pause in the podcast for a minute because I had so much come up and things that I've been needing to process, that I've had to actually be like, wait, am I ready for this?
Yeah. Well, I would just respect so much the integrity that you're walking with. I relate on every level. There's been moments where I'm like, am I fucking crazy? Have I lost my mind that I started an ecosystem of transformational containers called the Dojo and called myself a liberation artist, And I just shared something with you before this episode that is part of that I'll share more as it ripens with all of you when I feel ready. But this is the walk of like, truly, what does it mean to be a liberation artist? It's actually standing for I have to do that for myself when it becomes true on every level. And I've had to be initiated at every threshold of expansion along the way in order to hold integrity in the work that I'm here to do. And what I'm hearing and seeing in everything that you're sharing is that integrity reflected, that you're bringing your vulnerability. I fucking love your humanity. I love guides, leaders, artists, musicians, visionaries that are human, that are willing to say, yo, guys, let me lay this transmission down. And also, yes, I started a podcast for all of you listening who have thought about it. Yes, Dor, like you've started a podcast that makes you a way shower for individuals who have been on the edge of that haven't gone through that threshold that you're describing. And then now you're at the next iteration of it. What does it mean to hold a field named the Freedom Code? For those listening, what is that commanding and demanding of you as a being in terms of your voice and your liberation? And it sounds to me like you're tracking that really well. Like it's revealing, it's ironic. You start the Freedom Code feeling like, yep, I feel pretty free. I'm aligned with starting the Freedom Code. And then it's like, bam, it's going to show you everywhere you're not free. And so then you're taking a pause to actually do the work around these pieces that have come up that are revealing where you're not free in order to liberate and get free, which is going to be an ongoing forever process because we're here in human. And at the next threshold point marker, when you feel like that those pieces have been integrated, you're going to go forward with the next iteration and the next level of episodes and whatever wants to come out from the new baseline. And it's like, we thank our own creations for initiating us into the being that we need to be in order to actualize the next level of those creations. We doula and birth them, and then they doula and birth us. And it's like this cyclical, wild experience when you actually claim your creatorship, because you are in co-creation and collaboration with the force of life. And life, one thing that's consistent, life is always going to do its best to grow and evolve and expand the life force, like we're always expanding. It's the opposite of stagnation. It's about the next iteration of what it is that you're here for. If we stay too long in the last one, we start to feel stagnant. Now, there's also a dance to that, because what's the difference between stagnation and just being, actually being still, being in integration period, being in receptivity? Like those are all energetics that aren't stagnation, but they also don't look like action, and they also aren't necessarily a season of high evolution. So I just want to name that, because there can also be an addiction to the next breakthrough and the next breakthrough and the next breakthrough. And it's important to also learn how to just be. And I personally am still working on that, but it's been very valuable to get to that place.
Yes. Yes. Well said.
Yeah.
And yeah, but I think for me, what has been so powerful about that frame is really understanding like every challenge is for my evolution. And then having like actually being able to witness that, nothing I am a victim to anymore.
That's massive.
And then that's fucking empowerment.
Yeah.
Holy shit. Like when you can actually make that switch, like from like y'all, like I was in Costa Rica and I shit my pants.
Yeah, you did. I can confirm that.
And I'm going through like all these different things and like logistics start falling through and all these different things are happening. And it would have been so easy to go into a self like pity spiral. And I did for a little bit because we need our victim moment,
Uh-huh.
like process all the emotions. But then like I even saw how all of that was like perfectly aligned for
Mhm.
what I was needing to cultivate within myself at that perfect moment in
Yeah.
time.
I think this is an important piece to like really pulse on, because there's an inadvertent, unconscious pattern sometimes where we get hooked on justifying our victimhood. But because this thing happened and this guy said this, and this story, even telling the stories of the past of, because this happened in my family and I have this pattern of being this way, so I keep doing this thing, you know.
Trauma can become an excuse for people.
Exactly.
And
So
I've
that's,
seen that actually a lot these days, and it's a little bit of dangerous territory, I think, that we're moving in.
it is. So I think it's important to name and start to look at, like, where do we utilize the trauma that we've been through in order to justify our victimhood?
Mhm.
And I think the moment that you can really use some willpower, perspective, awareness, compassion, and love to catch yourself when you're justifying your victimhood, that is different than processing the emotional content as it's rising. That is different than, like, this is not a recommendation to bypass your emotional experience. You can still, like you said, no, there was a moment I needed to actually go through the emotional experience and feel it fully, like the somatic experience you had the night before launching the podcast. Those are moments, and I actually would like to go into that and hear more about how you process somatically and what actually that looks like for you. But there's are you actually making momentum on feeling what it is that's there to feel? Because really the only way out is through. I've tried everything and there is no other way.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a certain, I notice in like the facilitation work that I do, there's like a meter that I found where someone processing their trauma, like meaning like telling the story of the trauma and it's coming up, and then there's a current time catalyst that is bringing up the trauma that's ringing the bell of the past. There's a certain value for a time of naming it, seeing the pattern, feeling what it's bringing up, processing that emotional content. And then there's like a turning point moment where
Yes.
we start to go into the addiction of justifying our victimhood, of perpetuating the wounding cycle, perpetuating the justification for why we should continue forward with our protection mechanisms because of what happened. You know, like it's makes sense why I can still, you know, close my heart because this thing happened when I was 5, or this thing is happening now. And actually looking at, okay, when does the switch happen? When we actually call in the energy of our higher self, really feel like, okay, I'm with the young part of me that's super activated right now. I have that part's back. I've gone through this somatic experience. I've allowed the emotions to move through my system. And then there's a higher, wider part of me that gets forged through the embodied experience of feeling your feelings. You then create a reference point of, oh, I can feel this feeling of unsafety, of being threatened, of being judged, of being rejected, of whatever I've been afraid to feel. This is actually me feeling it. So I no longer need to protect myself. I no longer need to be the me that is in protection or justifying why I need to protect myself from feeling this feeling, because here I am feeling the feeling I've been afraid of. So thank you, Catalyst. Thank you, thing that happened when I was young. Thank you to it all, because it's showing me what I'm fucking made of. And here I am here with my higher self, my God consciousness, my allies, my whoever's around me. But the most important is me here having my own back, feeling this experience through fully. And once that actually lands, there's this level of empowerment that comes in that is irreplaceable. And it only happens through the feeling the things you've been afraid to feel. But then there's this fine line between those like ringing the bell of the trauma again and again and again, when you're feeling the things you've been afraid to feel with an expanded perspective that can see that it's the inner child, or it's the you even from 5 days ago that is processing that emotion, and there's a wider, larger, more loving part of you that is holding all the parts that are really fucking scared and really fucking going through it, and giving them permission to go through it for as long as they need to. And then they'll see those parts will start to calm down and the larger part will hold. And then there's a meeting that happens, which is like, oh, wow, I don't actually have to protect myself from this experience anymore. So I'm free now to create my reality and make decisions from an empowered place that isn't like playing chess with life to try to avoid circumstances that might make me feel that thing I'm afraid to feel from a trauma of the past again. So the who we become in the future now is a whole new can of worms. So I think you're tracking there that there's a turning point where we utilize and get overly addicted to justifying our victim story through trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So how did that look different for you? Like, let's say the night before the podcast, where you were actually having a somatic like trauma response,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like your body was actually going through a trauma response,
Mm-hmm.
connected to, if you can link it even into the history of, connected to, there was a part of me that had fear of being seen or using my voice. And this is what had been stored in my body. What, like how, so for anyone listening, if they're about to come up against a major life threshold and risking doing something that the somatic body knows might ring the bell of a past trauma, but it's actually about transcending and healing and integrating those parts rather than avoiding the experience. So you were going right into an experience that very well might ring the bell of those past trauma, and that's part of what the body was doing. So what can you be even more granular about what that looked like and felt like for you, and how you moved through that in order to launch it the next day?
So, I can't tell you that I remember everything how I processed it and everything I did with this particular thing.
Yeah.
But I will just share in general about that.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, I think we need to, how do you say, edge our way into these experiences. So little by little, it starts little by little. And I'll tell you about, I finished a really intensive life coaching training program this year. And earlier this year, when I went on to coach in front of 200 people and be judged basically by Stephanos, I had a trauma response as I was trying to coach this girl. Because I was like, there's 200 people watching, and my nervous system just went, like, I basically blacked out, and I didn't really know what was going on. And, that wasn't my choice. That was just my nervous system. Long story short, I ended up doing fine, I guess. Somehow I did okay. But, that had to happen. Like, that had to happen at some point where I'm like edging my nervous system to start to be able to hold those experiences. So after that, in myself who kind of likes to push the edge, I was like, let me go live on Instagram now. That's also kind of scary. I'm also talking in front of people. So I was like, if I can actually start to retrain my nervous system, like more. So I was like actually putting myself in a situation I didn't want to do in the fire on purpose, knowing I'd be afraid. I even named it when I went on my live. I was like, I'm a little afraid. This is what just happened to me. And I just talked honestly and openly about it.
So magnetic.
So it's like all these little pieces, I think, gave me the capacity to even meet the moment of like, I'm launching a huge podcast, or like huge in a way that like anybody in the whole world can view. what I'm sharing. That's a lot
Yeah.
if you actually think about it. And I hadn't thought about it like that until I got up until the point of the edge where the nervous system was being triggered. But then, yeah, actually meeting the moment, I think it's like, yeah, we have to like allow the fear to run through the system and then just like nurture yourself.
Mm.
Like we have to remember to nurture ourselves. Like we don't have to stay in that fear. We don't have to stay in that feeling. Like I think the problem with like pop psychology kind of trauma stuff on the internet is it'll just take a line like feeling is healing and then people run with it and then they misperceive it. And I actually don't believe that. And I think that's a little bit like reductionist because I made that mistake in my journey where there was a point where I was like grieving and I thought I just had to sit with the grief until it went away.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just sit with it and cry and cry and cry and just cycle in it and like be in the story
Mm-hmm.
for hours. And I was just in this victim cycle because I was like, I'm feeling my feelings. Like, this is my healing. But then I actually realized looking back, I was like, no, honey. Like, there's a time where we just choose to pick ourselves up and like and activate that whatever you want to call it, the higher self, the mama, the archetype, like using the archetypal energy of connecting to my power and pulling myself and hold and not being so entrenched in the emotion that it for so long that I become it and I start to believe it, but like separate myself from it and remember like this piece of me and like love it and honor it and give it what it needs, but not letting it overtake me and become me. Because I made that mistake for a minute. And I think it's healing is a part of the ingredients of healing. Feeling is part of the ingredients of healing, but it's not the feeling itself that's going to heal. It's a deeper process. And I think it's different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I think yeah, I don't know if I answered that question correctly. It went all kind of all over the place, but
Oh, it was great. Yeah, you definitely brought us where we needed to go with it. It's from your experience, there's a turning point moment that, you know, you give yourself permission to feel through it fully for as long as is true. And then for you, there's a turning point where it's like there's a higher self consciousness that came in and held you. And it feels like the power of decision, you know?
exactly. And that's it,
Mhm.
is we have to actually remember that we have the choice
Mhm.
to pull on this power outside of ourselves. You could call God, source, your higher self, and actually choosing to pull that powerful energy in and like pray into it. That's a big tool for me, is like when I am feeling a part of me that's like disempowered or unworthy, like I will pray to it and I'll pray in my strength, like out loud by myself.
Mhm.
And I will be praying from the strength part of me and like feeling this part of my body that's
I love
holding that pain and
I
just
love
like speaking to it, empowering myself into it, like giving it to the fire, doing it in the bath, like
that. I love
pulling it through with my willingness, with my power, with my breath, with my prayer, and with my willpower,
Mhm.
because we can.
Yeah.
And sometimes we forget that we can't, that we can.
And I think you're speaking to like, you know, on the highest level when that turning point is, right? Like grief is a thing that comes in waves, you know,
That's a hard one.
and any, you know, deep trauma surfacing process, like the process of feeling, definitely not shaming that. That's a huge part of the healing process. And I think this is a call forward. What you're naming is a call forward to really own that we do, as you know, God, sourcing God consciousness through physical human bodies, have the capacity to know when that turning point is, like when it is healthy and essential to be in the emotional process and to feel through and let yourself, cry or tantrum or just like move the emotional energy in whatever ways are true on a somatic level. And then there's a turning point where there's a higher, it's almost like mother and father energy, where the great mother is like, for as long as it takes, infinite compassion forever and ever. Like that part is important. That part doesn't bypass the feeling. And
Mhm.
that part also is well complemented by the vertical paternal father energy, which is like, and like, let's pull up our bootstraps. You're stronger than you think you are. You've got this, and there's like, how do we track when that turning point is where, and it might even be like, there's a phase where a lot of grief is coming up. And then it's like, okay, there's a turning point where now I've got you and I'm making this decision to show up for myself in a new way. And it's because that's time. And I just want to hold everyone as able to know when that time is without holding resistance to them. And 2 weeks later, there might be another wave out of nowhere where it's like, oh, now it's time to great mother myself and be like, yo, I actually need to feel this. And I'm not going to act from the feeling. I'm not going to justify my victimhood, but like what I need for self-care right now is to feel this. And then, it's like, I think the
Yeah.
biggest thing I'm getting from what you're bringing is like, there's a knowing, like you were in the grief portal for a long time. And then there was like a realization that you were spinning in it, like in the cycle, spinning unnecessarily, like you had gassed out, and at least in that phase, that brand of that particular wave of grief. And it was like, oh, I don't have to stay in this. Oh, I can pull up my bootstraps. It was like your great father came in and said, like, I believe in you. You come on. There's a way out of this that is available. There's a timeline. There's a pathway here. And you don't have to stay in the repeated cycle of the story, the story, the story. And you took some actions there that really liberated the energy in a big way. And that was that like vertical energy that I think is really significant and important to name, that we have both.
Yeah. And compassion in the whole process.
Compassion.
Compassion, being compassionate when it's like, oh yeah, I was spinning in the victim. That's okay.
Totally.
Okay.
That's everything.
Like learning to talk to yourself, your mistakes, the pieces you see that maybe weren't in integrity, whatever you're looking at, and being
Yes.
able to like talk to it like a little child and be like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's okay. I see you, girl.
Yeah.
And mean it,
Yeah.
and mean it. So as we start to land the ship of this episode, I really honor you, Dee, for all the times I've seen you meet yourself with profound compassion and strength and compassion and mean it and mean it. And for everyone listening, I really encourage you to find exactly where you could serve up just a little bit more patience and compassion for yourself, no matter how many times you're like, oh, fuck, I just did the thing again. Oh, I'm in that pattern again. No, serve up the compassion because I guarantee you deserve it, and mean it, like really find the way within you to let it land.
Yes. And this is yeah, this came up recently where I saw myself like really behaving in some old patterning
Uh-huh.
in a ways where I totally dishonored my own boundaries and different things. And I chose not to beat myself up for it. I chose to see it.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, that's okay. I had to cycle through this lesson again to learn it. And now I've learned it.
That's
Now
right.
I've learned it better.
It's like a muscle that you've strengthened.
Okay. Yeah, it's like this, like, it's everybody talks about the spiral, but it really is because it's like I'm moving. Oh, I learned the lesson. Oh, but I'm coming up again, but I'm a little bit higher this time. So I'm getting through it faster.
Yes.
I'm choosing to see the lesson and I'm being more kind. I'm being kinder to myself. And I think we can hold ourselves in such like a too deep of a process when we're too hard on ourselves.
That's it. the greatest evolutionary the greatest evolutionary lubrication is not perfection and pressure. The greatest evolutionary lubrication is compassion, acceptance, and love, no matter
Yes.
what.
Yes.
So I think that's a good place to land it. This was such a beautiful journey with such truth and depth. So thank you for bringing your voice. Thank you for bringing your humility and your humanity and your vulnerability and your power and the full spectrum of all of it. I love you so much.
Thank you so much.
And I'd love for you to share where anyone listening can find you, can find your music, can find your art to work with you. I highly recommend. I've done many a photo shoot and video project with Dorian. So I just recommend this woman across the board.
Thank you. Right now, I'm mostly on Instagram at Dorian with 2 I's, Dorian. And I will be launching a Spotify soon, and all of that will be through my Spotify. My podcast, The Freedom Code, is also linked there as well. So that's just kind of a channel to all of the different channels.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dee. And to all of you, thank you for listening with all of your hearts and all of your presence. I am so grateful for you. And if this episode or any of the episodes have touched your heart, I would so appreciate leaving a written review because it really does help the show reach more hearts and lives all over the world. Thank you. And I look forward to seeing you all next time.